Hello everyone and welcome back to Wordfence Live. If you've been using Wordfence for long enough, you've likely received an increased attack rate alert. Your first thoughts may be, have I been hacked? Do I need to make changes? Is Wordfence set up correctly? Well, today we're going to look at what attackers may be targeting on your site and talk about some strategies to secure your sites so you don't have to worry anymore. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to get started. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Wordfence Live. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. Today, we're talking about WordPress under attack. We've all received alerts at some point or another warning us of malicious attempts on our site, whether they're targeting the login page, XML, RPC, maybe specific vulnerabilities and plugins. You might be seeing the firewall blocking specific attempts at specific versions of plugins, or maybe they're just trying to overload the site with requests. Today, we're talking about what these attackers are up to, and even on the most insignificant sites. So if you're running just a small little site that you test different themes on and such, and you're seeing these emails and these blocks, we're going to go over that today. You might be wondering when you're seeing these, what happened? What are the attackers looking for? What's Wordfence doing to protect me? And what more you can do. But understanding these attacks and the alerts that you're receiving will empower you to make better security decisions for your WordPress sites. So joining me today will be threat analyst Ram Gall and our director of marketing Kathy Zant to discuss what to look for on your site after receiving these alerts and what you can do right now to better protect yourself for the future. Remember to hit the like button below the video here, as well as the subscribe and bell buttons to be notified when we go live, which is every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's get started by bringing in our threat analyst, Ram Gall, and director of marketing, Kathy Zant. Ram, how's it going over there?
It's going pretty good. How are you, Scott?
Oh, doing well. Having some audio issues, but you know, you'll have that when you're live, I suppose.
You sound great, so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You sound like we're maybe underwater right now, but it'll clear up eventually. Kathy, what's up?
Not much. Just keep swimming, Scott. Just keep swimming.
Yeah, I might have to go up for air at some point, but it's okay. We'll get there. Let's start off swag right off the bat here. You're going to be seeing a link in the chat. Click it, and you're going to want to guess on this one, I think. In 2020, how many malicious login attempts did Wordfence see on WordPress sites? That's multiple choice, thankfully. Your guess will be as good as mine there. A lot, I suspect, right, Kathy?
I think there were a lot. I think this came from the threat research that RAM did at the end of 2020. So there is a number.
It was a lot. It was a really big number. It was a shockingly big number. So, like, yeah. I hope I didn't give it away just by saying that. But
you didn't.
You should all read my article because it is one of the finest things I've ever written. No, but it was actually pretty cool, and I did put some effort into it. So.
If you haven't already, click on the link and submit your guess, the first 5 correct answers there. Or maybe you know the exact number already. You've been reading that research and you've submitted the correct answer. Okay, let's get started here and talk about why WordPress is attacked and why maybe you're seeing, as I mentioned, insignificant sites being attacked. Kathy, do you want to start us off there?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to take a look at, why is this happening? Why do you need security on WordPress? Why are hackers going after WordPress sites? Well, WordPress is powering now, 40% of the web. So 40% of the major sites out there on the internet right now are using WordPress. And if you're an attacker, if you're a hacker, if you think through what the actual motive is for most of these individuals, it is profit. So they're going to go after the biggest, juiciest targets. Now, they could go after targets such as, the New York Times, which uses WordPress, but the New York Times also has a budget and has security professionals who are sitting looking at logs all the time, and you have small sites that are using WordPress. Sally's cat blog, which we've talked about here before. You've got a number of people using sites just as blogs. You have a number of small businesses using WordPress for their company's website. And if you collect together, say, 100 or even 1,000 WordPress sites that don't have the security that, say, the New York Times has, you might get the biggest bang for your buck focusing on all of these smaller sites with less security than you are focusing on a large, juicy target such as the New York Times. So this is what hackers are doing. They are leveraging technology to write bots. You know, it's not some guy sitting in the basement wearing a hoodie attacking Sally's cat blog. It is a guy, maybe in a hoodie, who's sitting there writing a bot script to attack as many sites as possible. Now, we get a lot of people asking us, why is my insignificant site being attacked? And Ram, we've talked about this before in the past, about insignificant sites still have something of value to provide these attackers, and that's why they write their bots to go after these sites. What do you know about this?
So it's really, it's important to not think of it in terms of being targeted. Your site's not being targeted. Your site's just on a list of millions of sites, and attackers really want to, add to the list of sites they control because, as Kathy said, the profit motive is pretty much the number one thing here. It's usually not even just a guy. I mean, it probably is someone who, a few people writing the scripts, but, they probably work for an organization that does this. And I mean, these enterprises will, they'll rent out their infrastructure. They'll say, hey, I've got 10,000 hacked WordPress sites and you can rent them for $50 a day if you want to attack more sites, if you want to DDoS them, if you want to use them to take over more sites. They might, add SEO spam to a site to promote some sort of sketchy product. They might add phishing pages to your site. They might use your site to send out spam and phishing emails because your site's not on a block list yet. And then they can collect logins and passwords from people for their, bigger accounts, or maybe even for their other WordPress sites. It's all about either growing their infrastructure or using the existing infrastructure to make money. And that infrastructure has gotten profoundly cheap for attackers to the point where they can just afford to send out attacks at all times, 24/7, at millions of sites, even when they pretty much know the attacks aren't going to work. But we'll get into that.
It's safe to
Yes.
say that Sally's cat blog is not safe from attacks. It's going to be found and it's going to be hit by bots. And I think a lot of the times people think that these are just real people that might be hitting the sites, but a good amount of the time these are bots just kind of looking for any site there.
Yeah, and I kind of wandered away from the point, but it's important to distinguish between attacks and intrusions. It doesn't matter if, a million bots try to get into your site. It only matters if one of them succeeds. And that's the big difference. Just being on the internet, your site is going to get attacked millions of times over its lifetime.
Right, and just being on the internet makes it valuable. A lot of people think about, well, all of the work they've put into it, all of the content they've placed on that site, all of the commerce that's happening on their site. They might think of those things as the value, but it's really
that doesn't matter to an attacker.
server.
They're willing to destroy large amounts of that value to obtain the tiny marginal value of your IP not being on a block list, of your site not being, marked as a spam site, of your server having resources they can use to send out of attacks. And they're willing to destroy all the value you've created in order to generate a teeny marginal amount of their own for themselves.
Well, let's talk about attack campaigns and what we normally see there, Ram.
So I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, and Kathy sort of got into this as well. But, attackers will frequently write scripts to attack sites for them. They'll just, grab a list of millions of sites. And, we've actually, I believe someone in the chat mentioned this, that they were seeing people trying to log into their site using login of name or something like that. And we've written an article about people trying to log into websites with, username of none and password of none. Basically, an attacker is going to use some sort of script to brute force a lot of sites at once, and they need a list of sites and they need a list of usernames and passwords to try that they've probably obtained from, other data breaches. But if they have that list of usernames, but if they forget to provide that list of usernames and passwords, a lot of the time the script will just keep on sending out those login attempts anyways with whatever the default value is, which is going to be like none, or login password. Because attackers are mostly using sites they've already hacked and taken over to perform further attacks, it's incredibly cheap for them to use this infrastructure to send out those attacks. And I mean, some attackers are smarter than this. Some attackers are not going to just, keep on attacking using logins that'll never work. Some of them will actually target vulnerabilities. One of the ones we've seen most recently that we're actually starting to see again is an attack campaign against vulnerabilities in Thrive themes that let attackers basically automatically log in as an administrator or create a new administrative user. And we actually saw an attack spike over the weekend that targeted like half the sites that have Wordfence installed. And here's the thing, Wordfence is not installed on all WordPress sites. So if they attacked half of the sites that had Wordfence installed, how many sites did they attack that didn't have Wordfence installed? And how many attacks actually succeeded? Probably, we estimate that only 100,000 sites actually have the vulnerable plugin installed, and most of them are patched, but it only takes 1,000 or so to make it worth the attacker's while to add to their, roster of compromised sites that they can then rent out or use to monetize further. We've recently seen attacks against, the Plus add-ons for Elementor. We wrote about that in March and April, since we were seeing a ton of attacks for those, and those actually persisted until like the first of the month. But yeah, pretty much any site on the internet is just going to be constantly attacked. Attackers are constantly probing for vulnerabilities. They're not going to check to see if you have the vulnerable plugin installed first. They're just going to favor the types of vulnerabilities where you can just write an automated script and throw it at the wall and see what sticks. So yeah, fortunately, Wordfence is really good at blocking those attacks and is also good at letting you know when your site is under attack. So we'll send you emails, right, Scott?
Yeah, let's take a look at some emails. Now, these emails, these are going to be activity reports that you can specifically set up in your all options area, and these can be daily, weekly, or monthly activity reports. Let's start off first. What you're going to see at the top of these is the top 10 IPs blocked section. And here, just take note of the number of blocks you're seeing. Now, if I were to receive this email over the course of a week, at the very top, you see it's cut off. This is over the course of May 10th through the 17th. These would be fairly normal to see here. So you might take into account the country you're seeing the block come from. If you're a premium user and you're using country blocking and you don't need traffic from some of these areas, that's something to consider, and we're going to see more of that here in a moment. But it's good to take note of the number of blocks. Go ahead, Ram.
I wanted to interrupt just to answer a question from Dave Harrington, since he brings up a really interesting question. And we do actually get this all the time, which is that if you have a vulnerable plugin installed and it's not enabled, are you still at risk? And the answer is it depends. There are vulnerabilities like the one we saw with WordPress File Manager last year that was an absolute that was problematic, specifically because the plugin didn't have to be enabled for an attacker to take advantage of it. They could just directly access the vulnerable file and upload malware to your site. Some vulnerabilities, the plugin does have to be active. As a general rule, it's best to deactivate and delete the plugin if there's no updates available for a vulnerability. And again, the Wordfence firewall will protect you, but you do want to optimize it, because optimizing the firewall lets it protect you even in cases where an attacker accesses the vulnerable thing directly instead of having to wake up WordPress first. So good reasons to optimize the firewall. Sorry about the the tangent. I'll let Scott get back to it, but I thought that was a useful thing to answer. So.
Yeah, even going back to like the file manager issues we saw, whenever you have those plugins sitting around on the site, if you're not going to use it for a while and you're not going to use it, then it's probably best to, even if it's deactivated, go ahead and get rid of that. So looking at our, just one more quick look at our top 10 blocked IPs. One thing I have seen here in support a few times is this top blocked IP or one of them. If you're seeing a large number of blocks, double check to make sure it's not your server IP, especially if you're using country blocking. If you're blocking the United States, which we do not recommend due to Google crawlers and some European countries as well, something to consider there. So whenever you're seeing a large number of blocks here, maybe one of them is far and away being blocked more, just make sure it's not a server IP there. Let's jump over the top 10 countries blocked, which if you scroll down in the email, this will be the next thing you see. Going right with the first image that we saw, Netherlands at the top, that one IP was amassing 71 blocks, so we see a few other IPs gave us 3 blocks in the Netherlands. So nothing standing out major here. This is what I would expect to see over the course of a day or 7 days for an activity report. Again, if you're using country blocking and you're just blocking a few countries, I would not be rushing over to block, a lot of those countries right there, because those are fairly reasonable block counts there. Next, when you're scrolling down, you're going to see top 10 failed logins. Going back to the none attack that Ram had mentioned, maybe you're seeing none right here under the username. Maybe you're seeing, I believe it was George in the comments mentioned login in brackets maybe, or parentheses. So what you can do there is, if it's not an existing user, you can go under your brute force protection settings, and you can add these usernames that you're seeing into the field, immediately block the IP of users who try to sign in as these usernames. And if it's not a registered user and somebody tries to log in with that username, they will be blocked.
Hey,
Another
that's
one-
my admin username. How'd you know?
Well, the Wordfence caught you. I mean, we're gonna get you on the immediately block the IP list, and it'll take care of it until you switch over to none, I guess, right?
Yeah, I really need to change my admin username to that or login. That way, give them a fighting chance, right?
Let's take a look at our next one, recently blocked attacks. Now, going back to our first image, you're gonna see that IP all across the board here. So our firewall is doing the work here. Malicious file upload, that's one of our firewall rules, made the block. Now, another thing to take into account on most of these images is the time that you're seeing. So all of these were made over the course of a minute. Another thing, we talked about plugins briefly. You see the user probe plugin down there is at version 4.9.17. If you're on a version less than that or older than that, get it updated. Thankfully here, the firewall is protecting you, but it's nice to not rely on that and go ahead and get the plugin updated. You also see a directory traversal attack there. You might see cross-site scripting. We see social warfare plugin down there. So this just gives you a good idea of what those IPs were doing that we're getting blocked in the top 10 IPs sometimes. So, and if you switch this to a month, you're going to get a good idea of which IPs were the worst, which countries were the worst for that month. And last here, let's take a look at recently modified files. So after a WordPress update or a plugin update, maybe a theme update, you're going to see files that have changed in this section. If you don't run any updates at all automatically, and you do them manually, and you're seeing some times in here of that you wouldn't be expecting, that would be something to take a look at. Though another good thing, going back to the Wordfence scanner, we're going to alert you if we have a malicious file, something matched one of our signatures there. So that's a good thing to take note of. So always go over and check your scanner. The same goes with modified files that are differing from what we're seeing in the WordPress.org repository. So overall, these can give you an idea of what's been changed on your site since you've last taken a look. Now, at the very bottom there, we see the updates needed section. This is important. If you're seeing a lot of plugins there and you're not updating on a regular basis, that can cause issues. When we see hacked sites, a lot of times it might be a plugin that is just severely out of date. Maybe it's been abandoned or removed from the WordPress.org repository. And those are both things that our scanner will alert you for. Now, staying on the topic here of emails, these are the activity report emails. These aren't going to come over as you're being attacked. But Kathy, you have something about these alerts that you're going to see while stuff is going down, right?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of different attacks that can target WordPress. You can have attacks that are targeting vulnerabilities. You can have attacks that are probing for possible vulnerabilities, and you can have brute force attacks, which are people who are, or a script that's basically trying to get into your site via a login, either via XMLRPC or via your login form. So one of the things that Wordfence does is sends you an email when one of these events happens. And this is something that you can go into settings and you can turn on and off. And there's a number of different settings, because we realize that all of you using WordPress are using it in a different way. And some of you who are managing a number of WordPress sites might be using WordPress in a number of different ways. You might have a commerce site, you might have a membership site, an LMS site. There are tons of different ways. You can have an events calendar, you can have tons of different things that you're using WordPress for. And each one of those different use cases is going to have a different security profile. So Wordfence attempts to give you all of the options that you need no matter how you're using WordPress. So let's take, for example, you have a membership site and you have a number of different people who are logging in. And let's say one of your users is brand new, they just signed up, they just paid you, and they're brand new to your site and they just get locked out. It's really good as the site owner to know that this brand new user got locked out, because as a customer service oriented person, you can reach out to them and say, I see you just got locked out, and be very proactive in assisting them, because you want them to have a good, positive experience the first time they're logging into the membership site. So you get a lockout email. That's really helpful, so you can go and help them. Let's say it's just your personal blog and your site is under a brute force attack and you're receiving all of these lockout emails letting you know basically that Wordfence is working, locking out individuals who are, or a script that's trying to log into your site, but you might not want to get these emails. If you're brand new to WordPress and it's your first time setting something up, these emails can be kind of scary. You're thinking, oh my gosh, my site is under attack. What do I need to do? And really, in essence, you're under attack, but your site has not experienced an intrusion. Now, if you get an email from Wordfence stating that your site has, an administrator has just logged in from Jakarta, Indonesia, this might be a problem if you don't have an administrator in that location. That would be something that would be categorized as an intrusion. So that would be something you'd want to investigate. And if that does not inspire you to start using two-factor authentication, which is completely free in the Wordfence plugin, go into login security and you can set all of that up. And we have some tutorials here on YouTube to help you set that up. Nothing else is going to encourage you to do that if you don't see that kind of login happening. So these lockout emails are really helpful to let you know what's happening, but also you have to put it in the right category. Is this an actual attack or is this an actual intrusion? And you're going to react to that alert differently no matter what's happening. And if you don't want these alerts at all, you can turn it off. If you want these alerts to go as an SMS, you can go authenticate your site to Wordfence Central, which is completely free, and then you can set it up to go as an SMS message. You can also set it up to go to Slack if you have a team of people working on your WordPress site. And again, Wordfence Central, completely free, and it just gives you additional ways of getting notifications that security events are happening on your site so that you can respond to them. Now, this whole episode is about security alerts, and we're hoping to give you sort of an overview of these alerts so that you can make good decisions about those things and put them into the right category and respond to these alerts in a way that is going to help you with your security overall. So this is why the lockout emails exist, but the control is in your hands of how you would like to receive them. But there's other emails that are going to be sent out to you, especially if your site is experiencing an increased attack, say SQL injections or other things like that. And Ram, can you talk a little bit about these, because you've seen some of these attacks happening not only in WordPress sites, but also via the entire Wordfence threat system of intelligence that you monitor. What can you tell us about what we're doing here with these increased attack rate emails?
First of all, I think it's important to note that some attacks require more requests than others. Like, again, attackers do kind of tend to favor simple one-shot. You can send one request or two requests to a site and know if you've taken it over. But there's also going to be attacks that require a little bit more digging and a little bit more hammering. SQL injection is definitely one of them. I think we might have a graphic for the increased attack rate alerts for this. But attackers often use a tool called SQL Map. Now, if someone's using SQL Map on your site, it does usually mean that they're taking a little bit more of a special interest in your site than they would otherwise if they were just going for, the vulnerability of the week. But the thing about SQL injection is it usually does take, dozens, hundreds, thousands of requests to actually extract information from the database. But, also if there's some particularly, popular vulnerabilities, like this was a couple years ago, the newspaper theme, the yellow pencil vulnerability, attackers would try a few different parameters just in case one of them didn't work in order to get their attack embedded in your site. So if we start seeing, an increase in attacks, we will send you an email about it. For instance, in this case, it's just because your site's getting a lot of requests from an IP that's on our block list. And IPs end up on our block list if they attack any of the sites on our network too much, even if they, kind of try to space it out so that they're not attacking the same site too often. Though in this case, it looks like they did. So small wonder it ended up on the block list. One thing I do want to what was that, Kathy?
Oh, I was so if a site is seeing an increased attack rate and we're measuring that, say it's running Wordfence free and it's getting an increased attack rate, this communicates if they're assigned into the Wordfence network that we see these attacks and that IP address, if there's one IP address that's attacking profusely, it ends up on a block list. And
Correct.
that block list is something that is available to Wordfence Premium users. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and how an IP address ends up on a block list?
Sure. So basically, we kind of monitor what kind of behaviors different IPs are performing against sites on our network. If an IP tries to and fails to log into your site 3 times, maybe it's just someone who forgot their password. But if that same IP tries and fails to log into 1,000 sites 3 times, they're probably part of a brute force campaign, and we'll record that. And that IP ends up on our block list until it stops sending out those requests for a little while. So one of the things about block lists is that a lot of the IPs that are sending out these attacks, they're not the attacker's own IPs. They're, systems that attackers have compromised, other websites or, routers that they've got an infection running on. And a lot of the times, that the infection will get cleaned up. Someone will run the antivirus on their home computer that's attacking websites and they'll clean it up. So it doesn't make sense to leave an IP on the block list forever because most of the IPs are just innocent people just, who happen to have an infected computer or like maybe they've got like a smart refrigerator that got hacked. Who knows? That is actually a thing, by the way.
Attack of the refrigerators, huh?
Yeah, IoT device is real easy to hack, frequently used in like denial of service and, brute force credential stuffing attacks. So what we'll do is, if an IP's been behaving badly recently in the past, 24 hours or 3 days or 7 days, we'll add it to our block list. And Premium Wordfence customers, if someone tries to visit their site from one of those IPs, they'll just get blocked out of hand because we know that IP has been up to no good. If that IP stops trying to send attacks out, if it slows down and calms down for, how long it takes to fall off the block list depends on how bad it's been. So if it's sent like 1 million attacks in the last week, it'll take a while to fall off. If it's only sent like a few thousand, it'll probably be off the block list in like a day. So yeah. that's how the block list works. It's pretty cool.
And as you said, IPs do not end up on this list by accident. In
Yeah.
support, we have people who write in, and unfortunately, they're on a shared IP, and maybe they're trying to access their site or another Wordfence site, Wordfence protected site, and they're getting that, page. I believe it says, why am I being blocked? And that is our block list page. So, you're just unfortunately on an IP that somebody else is, taking advantage of. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. But
Yeah,
like Grant
get-
said, it'll get dropped at some point as well.
We get this request all the time. There's a number of people who'll be using like a VPN, which is not necessarily a bad thing to use if you value privacy, especially if you're out and about and maybe on unsecured wireless networks. But people will wonder why they're on a VPN connection and their site and they get blocked access to a site. It's not because we discriminate against VPNs or hate VPNs. It's because enough people decided that they wanted to use that particular VPN endpoint to attack a bunch of sites. So again, it's entirely based on the behavior of the IPs that and what they're doing. And once an IP stops misbehaving, we remove it from the block list.
Speaking of Internet of Things and devices, I recall on the podcast last week there was a section on Wi-Fi, maybe a frag attack. So if that interests anybody here and they want to listen to that, I believe that was somewhere in the middle of the podcast from last week. Excellent podcast. Now, Ram, I think you have some strategies here for dealing with some increased attack rates. Is that right?
We do actually. I'm going to basically say that the number one strategy, and this is especially if you have Wordfence Premium, but even if you don't, most of the time, just sit back and relax. Wordfence, if what you're seeing is mostly, failed login attempts, stuff like that, Wordfence will automatically respond to those. Even if you're not a premium customer, our brute force protection will still lock people out by default after they try to log in a set number of times within a certain number of minutes. So, yeah, that'll protect you from people who are trying to get in that way.
And you saw that in the activity report. If you're getting that weekly or monthly, you're seeing that people are trying to hit different plugins or they're getting caught by the firewall. So whether you're on free or premium, just make sure your firewall's enabled, and ideally you optimize the firewall as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, there's a question or a comment from Total Production where they saying, when I see IPs on the block list, I always make permanent. And we see this a lot with people who, they see an IP address doing something bad. They see malicious attacks coming in, brute force attacks coming in, and they want to make that permanent because that's the bad guy. That's kind of like playing whack-a-mole, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Ram?
it's not the bad guy. And I mean, we kind of sort of are getting around to this. We've brought up that, people can bypass country blocking if they're using a VPN. Yes, but if that VPN's misbehaving, it'll still get blocked by the block list. That's sort of, we use layered protection to deal with all of these ifs and buts and gotchas. Because there's no one perfect strategy for dealing with everything. And again, if you see a bunch of attacks from, say, the Netherlands, that doesn't necessarily mean your attacker's in the Netherlands. It means that they might have compromised a bunch of computers that are in the Netherlands, and those computers are attacking your site at their behest. But, someday the person who's actually in charge of those computers might actually clean them up and go, hey, why can't I get to any sites anymore? So, yeah, perma-blocking is... The IP space is in constant flux. I mean, if you're on a standard residential connection, chances are your IP address has changed a dozen times in the last month. And if one of your IPs ended up on our block list, and it might have, you probably don't want it to stay on there forever, and it won't, because whoever had it last is, not on it anymore and not sending out attacks anymore on that IP. So...
Right. Once an IP address it has been used as in an attack, it's something. It's like it just gets burned.
Yeah.
It's not useful to the attacker anymore. It gets on block lists, and it's not just our block list. It's going to end up on blacklists with Google and other sort of blacklisting authorities out there. So they're going to use it until they can't use it anymore, and then they're going to move on. And so it's really helpful to have something like the real-time blacklist that Wordfence uses in Premium, because that's going to intelligently follow attackers no matter where they go on the internet. There is no hiding, because we're looking at what they're doing and where they're doing it, and we keep following it as they move along.
Yeah. And, this kind of covers something that where you were kind of getting at again. And yeah, it's just that, IPs aren't social security numbers. They're not global unique identifiers. And this is one of the reasons why attackers want to take over your site. It's because you have an unburned IP address that they can use to attack people because it's not on a block list yet. So, yeah. I think we were going to go with, strategy number 2. We kind of got into it already, which is use Wordfence Premium. The block list is super important, and it's a really good reason to use Wordfence Premium. But honestly, I think that one of the things that's most important about it is that we immediately push any firewall rules for new vulnerabilities to our users as soon as we've triaged those vulnerabilities. And that typically happens within 24 hours of us finding out about them, whether we're the original researcher or not. So, I mean, there's a lot of very specific attacks against WordPress plugins that aren't going to be blocked by something like Cloudflare. They're not going to be blocked by, fail to ban or, mod security or something, because they rely on very specific circumstances. And the Wordfence Firewall is capable of dealing with those attacks when there's not a lot of other solutions that are. So that's a good reason to use Wordfence Premium. I mean, if you're a free user, you'll still get those rules. It'll just be delayed for 30 days. You also get malware signatures immediately, which are also useful in case people are trying to upload malware to your site, because one of our firewall rules checks all the file uploads against our malware signatures. And if you're a premium customer, it checks it against the most recent malware signatures. So that's pretty cool. Country blocking. Country blocking can be useful. I think of country blocking a lot like I think of hiding the WordPress admin page, in that it's primarily a spam control measure. It helps cut down on the number of things you have to worry about. It does have a little bit of additional utility. For instance, if you're not supposed to do business outside of a certain country, that means that you give your best effort to preventing that from happening. And anyone who circumvents that is pretty much no longer your fault. So, and then, of course, there is premium support, which, Scott, Adam, and Tim are really good. And Phil, who's not in the chat, is also awesome. So, yeah.
Phil is likely over in support right now helping somebody. Going back to country blocking, when somebody writes in support, maybe they just started using Premium. They're asking, should I block a lot of countries? Where should I start? Starting with the login form is usually a good place to start. And if you're seeing a lot of attempted logins from specific countries, maybe add them slowly.
Yeah, block countries that are causing your site problems. If there's just an unusual number of attacks from a certain country and you don't expect to ever have business from that country, then yeah, that's a great use case for country blocking, because it'll cut down on the amount of things they can even try before they just get, permabanned. And I mean,
people can get overzealous with country blocking, though. I mean, I've seen situations where there was someone in Canada, and I just do business in Canada, so they used country blocking and blocked everything except Canada, and it affected their connection to PayPal, so they couldn't take in any money because PayPal needed to communicate back to their website. They were also blocking Google's crawlers, so it was affecting their SEO. So it's really good to be judicious in the countries that you're blocking and make sure that there is no case whatsoever that's going to affect your site when you're blocking that particular country, and to really only block things that, like you said, Ram, you're really having problems with.
Exactly. And I mean, yeah, use it judiciously, you'll be fine. But realistically, I think the very best benefit of getting Wordfence Premium is that it lets us do threat research and us do cool live streams where we can, teach you about security and WordPress security and stuff. So yes, we appreciate you, Wordfence Premium customers, from the bottoms of our heart.
Yes, thank you very much.
if you're subscribed to the mailing list and you get those emails alerting you that this plugin or this plugin needs to be updated or there's an issue here, you can thank our premium subscribers for that, because that research from Chloe and Ram and the rest of the threat research team is directly coming from that. Now, you touched on some of the premium features, Ram. How about 2FA and login security?
So that's a free feature. And that is actually probably one of the best things I would recommend doing. Turn on two-factor authentication for all administrators, all editors, anyone with write access to your site, basically. And here's the thing about two-factor authentication. A bunch of studies by Google, other people demonstrated that if you use like the one-time password-based two-factor authentication, like you get from say Google Authenticator, or 1Password lets you use it as well. Basically, what we use in the login security module or the standalone login security plugin, that is 99% effective, even at preventing targeted site takeover. So, like, if an attacker just happens to have your username and password from a data breach somewhere, it's 100% effective at preventing that from taking over. But even if even if they try to socially engineer you, it still helps a ton. So turn on two-factor authentication. It is literally the most important thing you can personally do for your security manually, I guess I should say.
And I hate 2FA. I want to get my work done, and I want to get in there and get things happening, and it always stops me, and I have to go get the code, and it's such a pain. But Wordfence has a couple of great features within
you can allow
the
list your IP if you've got like
list your IP.
Yeah, if you've got like a IP you're always going to be logging in from, or you can tell it that to not ask for 30 days. We don't have hardware key support, YubiKey support yet, but that is on the list of things we would like to support in the future.
It is. But yeah, so we try to make it as useful to you as possible. I mean, definitely use 2FA, no matter, even if you hate it like I do, it's still useful, but we have a couple of different features in Wordfence that are going to make it a little easier for you. So, give yourself that 30-day grace period and whitelist your IP within the login security, and it'll make it a lot easier.
Definitely. And login security also adds a reCAPTCHA. That'll definitely cut down on the number of, failed login attempts. So that is an option as well. This comes with the free version of Wordfence. It also comes with our standalone login security plugin. If you don't feel like having all the awesome protection that the Firewall offers you and the malware detection offers you, you can still turn on login security protection.
We all certainly hate, and I see in the comments as well, everybody hates 2FA, but also the hackers hate 2FA because it is extremely difficult to figure anything out to get around there. If you're using SMS-based 2FA, then consider, making the jump to authenticator-based, right?
Okay, so one thing I do want to kind of plug, 1Password lets you set up 2FA in it, and if you install like the little browser extension for it and set up the 2FA within 1Password for each account, it just automatically fills the 2FA section. Like, it's pretty awesome. It makes it way less of a pain to use 2FA if you use like a password manager with 2FA support. It's just automatic. You don't have to reach for your phone. At worst, you have to copy and paste from the app window.
Yeah, and Susan says, what if you can't talk your customers or your clients into using 2FA? And my strategy would be,
reset their password and lock them out.
Well, you could do that too. But I would, agree with them that, obviously, when you're in a sales process, you want to connect with where they're at. You want to connect with them, and I understand it is more difficult, but let's do things like what Ram just said. Let's get you on a password manager, because this is going to not just make your site more secure, it's going to make your life more secure. Get them using this elsewhere. Get them using it for their bank accounts. If their bank accounts use 2FA, I'm still shaking my fist at the banking industry for not having more second factor or multi-factor two-factor authentication, but help them to sort of bring this not just for their website so that it's you enforcing it on them, but help them to understand that this is not just about WordPress. This is about everything in their life. And then you make this a habit across the board, and you're not only providing a service of making their WordPress site more secure, you're making their life more secure, and you're expanding your value to them as a consultant in their life. So I would use this as an opportunity to really differentiate yourself from the other developers that are out there who might not be as security aware as you are.
Exactly.
Alexander in chat wanted to go against what I said, and he loves 2FA. So I'm glad to hear that. It's great to use. Now, Susan, if you're having trouble talking your client into using it, on our YouTube channel, Kathy has an awesome video that she did about setting up login security and 2FA, and it walks you through very easily. It's a fairly short video, so if you have any trouble, if they're afraid that they're not going to be able to do it correctly, you know, in support, we see it a good bit. Somebody, they're not used to using a smartphone, or they're not sure if they're going to get locked out. And, you know, unfortunately, I've done it as well. Whenever I switch phones, I always forget to swap over my 2FA codes. So if, as Ram said, you know, I cannot recommend 1Pass enough. You can save all your backup codes there, and it just makes things a lot easier. Now, Ram, what about optimizing the firewall? That has to be one of the strategies, right?
Okay, yes. Optimizing the Wordfence firewall is really, really important. We already kind of discussed one of the reasons it's important, and that is that it can protect your site against attempts to hack stuff that's vulnerable, even if, say, the plugin's disabled, even if, you know, WordPress itself doesn't get loaded first. So that's one of the very good reasons to optimize the firewall. There is, however, another reason to optimize the firewall, and that's that it blocks attacks before the rest of WordPress starts out, and that means that it has a little bit less impact on your server resources than it might otherwise. So each attack is going to impact your server's performance a little bit less. It's still not a full-blown DDoS solution. We'll get to that in a minute, but optimizing the Wordfence firewall is really important both for keeping your site safe and for minimizing the performance impact of attacks.
Have we seen cases where the firewall not being optimized has prevented one of our firewall rules that we put out from protecting?
Yes, that file manager vulnerability specifically. That was a case where, you know, attackers would access the file directly. If the firewall was optimized, it prevented them from uploading malware to the site. If it wasn't optimized, then Wordfence wouldn't have run until after everything else loaded. Well, until after WordPress started loading, at least. And if there's basically a vulnerability where WordPress doesn't even get loaded at all, then, you know, the firewall has to be optimized to protect it against that vulnerability. So, yes, optimize your firewalls, people. It's another one of the most important things you can do. Yeah, there's a lot of important things you can do, but I feel like these two are particularly important. The two-factor authentication and firewall optimizing are really important.
Now, Kathy, I think you got a storm rolling in over there. My audio sounds like I'm underwater, so maybe this is a sign. Just, you know, stay out of the rain, stay away from the water.
It is just pouring here. I tried to mute a couple of times when I saw lightning just to stop the thunder from reverberating. So
I did hear a crash just now, so.
Yeah.
So we are on strategy 5 here, making our way through. What is this one, Ram?
Strategy number 5 is in case of a denial of service attack, specifically a distributed denial of service attack. This is when attackers aren't trying to log into your site. They're not trying to take over a vulnerability. They're trying to bring your site down. And they're using, you know, multiple computers, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of computers to take your site down. Now, your average WordPress site is not going to run into this, except sort of by accident. Maybe if you're on a shared server and they're targeting someone else on the shared server, that's one of the circumstances where you'll see something like this, in which case there's not that much you can do about it, which is why it's always a good idea to set up a VPS if you can. But denial of service attacks, and specifically distributed denial of service attacks, they're one of the places where Cloud Firewall and a CDN, something like Cloudflare, something like AWS CloudFront, those kinds of things are going to be extremely beneficial. you do actually want to handle them before the attacks get to your server, just because one server is not going to be up to the task of handling all of those attacks. In order to make this happen, you need to make sure that your site's what they call origin IP, the actual site IP, isn't obviously visible. So once you're behind some sort of cloud firewall, you want to also make sure to block any requests that aren't going through the cloud firewall. You can usually manage this in htaccess or your Nginx configuration. But yes, there are times when you do want to use a cloud provider to manage security, and denial of service attacks are that time.
Yeah, and Wordfence works really well with services like Cloudflare, right? So there's a couple of settings you can do to adjust that, and it's nice to have that extra layer of security where, you're protected against a DDoS should, God forbid, it ever happen. Highly unlikely for most WordPress users, but can happen if somebody wants to target you. So you can have that protection there, but that also gives you the option of doing, a CDN so that some of your images and things are served up a little bit faster. But never forget having that endpoint for protection of that firewall, that Wordfence firewall on your server integrated with WordPress. So I always see people using both and think that that's kind of a good solution to solve, that layered security approach.
100%. Use both, especially if you're anticipating getting a bunch of traffic. One or the other is not a complete solution. Wordfence is, I want to say, unparalleled for application level security. We're going to block the attacks that no one else will, because we're blocking attacks against specific code vulnerabilities, things that might be very complex or very simple but aren't going to match a standard generic set of patterns, which is what Cloudflare mod security, all of that will protect against. But again, Wordfence is not going to prevent people from trying to connect to your site using SSH and brute forcing your SSH ports. And because that's a completely different level of the stack. And again, if there's, if you're getting a lot of traffic, then having a CDN is a good idea to speed up your site. And we've measured this using our fast or slow performance measuring tool, which, by the way, is pretty awesome. We now have Google Core Web Vitals measurements on it, so you should check it out. Check out the update.
We will have.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I'm playing. What you were going to say is basically we're going to have an episode coming up very soon where we're going to look at some of the updates to fast or slow.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Mark and Ram last time. Now, we did have a question here. Since we're talking about maybe your site's under attack right now, Mac Raven asked, is my site unsecure when in learning mode? And if you're under attack, you certainly wouldn't want to be in learning mode. But typically in support, I recommend using learning mode just for the least amount of time as possible. So if you find something that gets blocked, maybe you're using a WooCommerce plugin or Elementor, a new plugin, and something blocks you while you're trying to do a normal function, you can switch over to learning mode just for a minute, try to replicate it, and then switch back. Ram, what do you recommend there?
I just want to kind of explain a little bit more about what learning mode is for. Learning mode is specifically to train the Wordfence firewall for a very small set of firewall rules that are a little bit more prone to false positives, cross-site scripting and SQL injection. So generally speaking, most of our firewall rules, they don't care if learning mode's on or off. It's just that for a very specific set of, I want to say, built-in protection, we want to make sure we're not blocking something that you're doing on purpose. So I'd actually recommend only turning on learning mode if you are experiencing problems, because then that can help you train the firewall to get around those problems. I do actually recommend setting the firewall to full enabled as soon as possible. So yeah, but learning mode is there for you if you start seeing it's blocking legitimate plugins. But we are also constantly working to minimize the need for it. So
always working towards that. Let's talk about swag here. What did we have for our swag answer? I did not look at the form, but our question was, in 2020, how many malicious login attempts did Wordfence see on WordPress sites? And if you guessed 90 billion, then you were correct. That's
90 billion sites.
a lot. Yeah, it's a little more than 1 million, if I remember correctly. Now, Ram, our swag winners, we have Samantha, Tom, Dawn, Renata, I want to say, and Lena. What would you say for that fourth name, Ram? Renata?
I think Renata's as good as I'm going to get, so yeah.
Okay. I always go for Ram for pronunciation there, especially for our swag winners. Plus, Tim likes to throw me a. If Tim has us unmuted right now, he always likes to get a kick out of me and the good names. That's a good name. I like that. So, congratulations to you 5 who won. And remember, you can always send in pictures of the swag or anything you'd
And
like.
pets,
there.
if you have any pets, we want to
Pets.
see them too.
Always.
Yeah. So now, anything else we want to cover before we start to clock out, Kathy, Ram?
We got the K through 12 thing, right?
That's what I was gonna ask Kathy
Let's-
about here.
yeah.
Because we
Yeah, we can talk a
we
little
made a
bit about
change
that.
there, right? A little ways into it, we decided to kind of open that up.
Yeah, well, over the last year, things have been fairly challenging for, a lot of people working in, new remote settings. And, our future, the children, think of the children. They've really had a tough time. My daughter, age 12, has had some issues with remote learning. It did not go very well. It has been quite a challenge. I feel so for her teachers. And so we wanted to help out those individuals who are teaching our kids. And if you're using WordPress, and there's tons of schools that are using WordPress, we wanted to give these schools, public schools especially, a gift. And that gift for public schools, government-funded schools worldwide, if you're teaching anyone that's kindergarten up to 12th grade, sort of like high school down through the little kids. If you have a WordPress site, we are offering free site cleaning if you get hacked, or free site audits just to make sure that all of your security is in top-notch shape, basically as a service to help everybody out who has gone under lockdowns and is forced in sort of this remote learning environment and having challenges. It's the least we can do. So that is an open offer. There is a link on the website. I think they'll probably put it into chat somewhere, but it's all over the website. So if you know of a school, you can send them to me. I will make sure that they're taken care of. But the link's on the website. All you had to do is fill that out, and we will take it from there. So it's a gift out to all of those schools out there.
We're also
Now-
hiring, right?
Yes, that was where I was going next. We have a handful of positions, right? We have software developers. I know PHP devs, right? Website performance researcher, QA. You could
Yeah.
work alongside RAM. What else do we have? Security operations, I believe.
If you know AWS and you like security, join us. We have coffee.
We do have coffee. We have great benefits. Head over to the Defiant is Hiring link that is in the chat. It's on the screen below. Head over there and you can see some of those positions that are available. We're building great things. Even if you're just, if you're a PHP person and you love PHP and you're just kind of like getting to know what this whole WordPress thing is about, we still would love to talk to you. If you love PHP and you love building things in PHP, we have a number of things that are happening here that aren't specific to the plugin. So we'd love to talk to you. Go fill out an application and we will get you into that pipeline. Fast or Slow is an amazing tool. We'll talk more about that in upcoming episodes. But we are doing some research with that to find out what makes a site fast and what doesn't. If you have ever done any performance optimizing for a site, WordPress or otherwise, there are so many different things that go into that. And if you are interested in that, if that is your passion, we'd love to talk to you about using Fast or Slow in that research mode. So definitely take a look at that job opportunity as well.
And before we let you go, if you've went in, you've configured your emails based off of this episode and you're getting things set up, don't forget about the podcast mailing list and the Wordfence mailing list. You can find both of them on wordfence.com in the footer there. As I mentioned before, if you sign up for the Wordfence mailing list, you're going to hear about new issues and plugins that you're probably likely going to hear about first from us in the mailing list. So if you have a bunch of plugins on your site and you want to stay up to date, then go ahead and get that set up. Same with the podcast. Last week, I know you talked about the Colonial Pipeline. You talked about WordPress 5.7.2, which had an emergency patch. So if you have not updated to that and you're curious about it, go back and check the podcast out. We talked about the Internet of Things with the Wi-Fi frag attack there. Some really cool stuff. So go ahead and check that out. We release that typically each Friday. So go ahead and get on the mailing list there. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit the like button below the video. You can subscribe. If you hit the bell, you'll be notified when we post videos. We don't do it a ton, so you're not going to get overwhelmed with alerts, but they're always good videos. Kathy or one of our other team members will be walking you through setting something up the best way possible. And we will certainly be back next Tuesday with another show, and we hope to see you all here, and we appreciate it. Go ahead, Ram.
Yeah, listen to us cast pods in the meantime every Friday, usually.
Each Friday, you can't beat it, and don't miss it. We'll be here next week, and we hope to see you, and we hope that you have a great rest of the week in the meantime. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Wordfence. We have better hackers.